Today's topic. So I'm not sure if I'll succeed in this topic, but what Israel and its supporters really need in order to win the information war. Number one is, and we know this inherently, but we're so busy playing defense we forget this. You cannot win by playing defense. We're always defending Israel. We're always reacting. There's very, very little proactive that's going on. However, keep in mind that when you are put on the defensive, you have to know how to answer. So defense should not be the huge part of our strategy. It has to exist though, and you have to know how to answer. So my last talk that I spoke at YU last month, I came up with a list of what I consider the 20 most popular anti-Israel arguments, and I didn't really cherry pick them. These are pretty much the ones I see over and over again, the things I thought were the hardest to answer, and I did as best I could to answer them or hopefully destroy these arguments. So I recommend, if you want to know that, watch that talk. There's a lot of detailed information there. There's a lot of source material in there that you can look at. But so it's also, again, to play defense, you have to know the background. You can't just say, oh, I'm pro-Israel, therefore I know the defense. And you see that happen too often, whether it's on college campuses or something like that. Too many people say, I'm pro-Israel, I know my stuff, and they don't. It takes time, it takes research. You've got to know the history, you've got to know the legal arguments, you got to know the emotional, the religious arguments, the cultural arguments. You have to know this stuff. You can't just pretend you know it, because that's worse than anything. When you make arguments and you don't know what you're talking about, and then the other side demolishes you, that's terrible. So if you don't know your stuff, don't jump in to the fray. It's better to not answer them and just ignore it, or better to find somebody else to answer it if it's worth it. And you have to think about the venue. And I'm not going to I talk about this in other times, but look at what the venue is. You're not arguing against the other person. You're not going to convince the other person, because the other person is usually already dyed-in-the-wool Israel hater. So you're not going to convince them. You have to look at who the audience is. And like on YouTube message boards, the audience is idiots. So there's no reason whatsoever to spend time arguing with people on YouTube message boards. Yahoo message boards, slightly less idiotic, but it's a waste of time because nobody's going to see very few people are going to see the argument. Sometimes it is worth it. Sometimes, if you're in a newspaper talkback thing, okay, I'm really getting irritated by that. But a newspaper talkback forum sometimes is very important to at least put in an argument, at least try to come up with a pithy, concise argument that's able to answer the other people. One thing I mentioned that's really nice is Amazon book reviews. It's a really good place to put stuff because the people that read that are literate. So if you see a bad book, by somebody who's anti-Israel, that's a place to rip it apart. You do it on your blog, no one's going to read it, but you do it over there, and people read it before they decide to buy. So you have to look at your venue and look at who the people are that's going to be reading it, that are going to be watching it, and that are going to be evaluating the strength of the arguments on each side. Next. The framework is critical, and I've made this argument before. This is a picture. This came out about 3 years ago. There was some very well-meaning liberal Israeli group decided that they wanted to have a fair-minded history book, to be able to put in Israeli schools. And what fair-minded means, they were going to have one side of the history book show the Israeli narrative, and the other side of the book would show the Palestinian narrative. And therefore, the truth would be somewhere in between. Okay, fine. And they published a mock-up of this thing. I don't think they published the full book online, but this is like the first page of chapter 1 of the mock-up. The chapter 1 begins from the Balfour Declaration to the first white paper. Both sides begin with the Balfour Declaration. And if you see this should be bothering you, because if the narrative, we're not talking narratives over here, competing narratives, if you start each narrative in 1917, we've already lost the argument. It's too late. Because the framework is history begins in 1917. Jews came from elsewhere to, go into the land that wasn't theirs, and now they're trying to justify it afterwards, why they should be able to do it. If the history begins in 1917 or in 1880 or anything like that, then the argument's lost. There's no way it's not competing narratives. If you talk in terms of competing narratives, we lose. History doesn't begin in 1880 or whatever. Next slide. Israel's history begins with the Torah. Whether you're religious or not, whether you think it's corny or not, the history begins thousands of years ago. The framework must begin then. We have to talk in terms of we are returning to our land. We are not moving to our land from Europe or from Arab countries or something like that. This is essential. Every single argument has to include that. Every single argument has to have the proper framework. Because if you start otherwise, we're completely lost. You have to always say, we are returning. This is not colonialism. This is not anything like that. This is the rightful residents, the actual residents of the land returning after 2,000 years. And you cannot say that enough, because that is the argument. And we happen to have some fairly good proof of it. You know, it's a little hard to say that the Bible came out of nowhere. The other thing that's also important, and you get, and it's easy for you to fall into the trap when other people try to frame the argument this way. They say, you know, well, Judaism's a religion. Okay, big deal. You know, you're a religion, so it's, you know, Islam's a religion, Christianity is a religion, but why should a religion have any rights over a land? You know, so you're really, but the point is the Jews are a nation. Just despite what Shlomo Sand says, despite what all these leftists are saying, Jews are a nation. It's very clear to prove that it's a nation. You could say, Mikam Kle Yisrael Go Yachad Baaretz. This also comes from the Bible. It's very, it's hard to argue against saying that the Bible said that the Jews were a nation when you have a very explicit verse that says so. Jews are the most indigenous people of the region. Again, can't argue with that. Now, some people are now trying to say DNA proves otherwise. That stupid DNA thing that came out does not prove otherwise. It was clearly skewed, and again, I wrote about it as well. And so I recommend if you can look at my blog to see I forgot the guy's name that wrote it, but it was his argument, and that was picked up also all over AFP and Reuters. They all wrote over the course of like 3 months. All of a sudden, every couple of weeks, another article would come up saying, this guy proves that the Jews came from the Khazars, and he did absolutely no such thing. And actual, you know, non-Jewish, but disinterested parties that know genetics and know history, they looked at it and they say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He clearly does not know the history. No, this is a DNA guy, this guy from Israel, actually. He wrote this whole study that says, you know, the DNA proves that that Ashkenazi Jews came from Europe. And of course, the Reuters got it even worse, and they said, because 90% of the Jews are Ashkenazi. Like, what? The whole thing was ridiculous. But it was, you know, but his basic assumption that he was making of saying that Khazars come from, I forget, Armenia or something like that, it just was completely wrong. He was like on the wrong side of Europe in his basic, he was absolutely completely wrong. And he was ripped apart, but he was ripped apart in small journals that nobody ever really saw. And again, the Jewish tie to land has been continuous. That's also an essential point that we just have to be that has to be hammered over and over again. You can't downplay Lishana Abba Yerushalayim. You can't downplay the fact that people were continuously moving. I mean, it's I saw this also. Shlomo Sand had a later book saying the invention of the land of Israel. After he was so successful with the first one, saying there were no such thing as a Jewish people, he decided there's no such thing as the land of Israel. And I didn't read the book, but I read the review in 972, a worshipful review by Yossi Gurvitz. And I looked at the review and I read what he said, what he said his arguments were, and the arguments were completely ridiculous. In which he says that, rabbis were discouraging people from moving to Israel. And I found, Encyclopedia Judaica article, which listed scores and scores of rabbis in the years, from between the year 200 and 500 that specifically moved to Israel. And then again, all of this is obviously documented in the Gemara, in the Talmud. And it's like, completely, and if you just find one thing that's so glaringly wrong, the rest of the book is wrong. And it took me seconds to find this one thing that was glaringly wrong. It was just absurd. So these are the things, these are really the proper framework. Every argument, you have to keep this in mind, whether you say it explicitly or not, but this is the framework when you're arguing about Israel. Because if you start the framework later on, there is no way of winning. We do look like colonialists. We do look like interlopers. We do look like people that are just going in and kicking other people out of their land. There's no other way of looking at it unless you look at it in the proper framework. So this is really, really critical. Next. Okay. It's not only a logical issue, and again, this is something that's also very dear to my heart. I've said in the past, my blog is not good hasbara. I think my blog is pretty good as far as being, chazik, strengthening, people that already are Zionists, people that are already pro-Israel. I give a lot of information. I give a lot of things that are arguments. I help a lot as far as that's concerned. As far as convincing other people, that's not really what my blog is about. First of all, because the title turns people off to begin with. But the secondly is because like most Jews, I'm analytical. I think of things logically and coolly, and I try to answer the arguments in a very logical, legalistic type of point of view. That's not how things are won. Things are won with emotions. This is you can't argue against, I just love the land. Nobody's going to argue, you don't love the land because you're initially, you can't argue that. If we say, sorry, this is my land and I love it. I feel at home here. These are my people. This is my land. Every single rock, every single stone calls to me. You say that, there's nothing they can argue with. There's nothing and liberals are scared of that because they're like, if he's so emotionally involved, then it must be, because that's exactly the Arab argument. The Arabs have cornered the argument on the emotional argument. I did this a few years ago. I looked up a list. I did a search on Reuters or maybe just all wire service photos that had the word in the caption of olive tree. And when you do that, it seems like the only people on the planet that ever plant olive trees are Palestinians. You know, the Greeks don't have olive trees. The Spanish, there's no such thing. It's only Palestinians, it's obviously a clearly thought out strategy. You know, saying, okay, the olive trees are ours. The Jews are always uprooting our olive trees. We've been doing olive trees for thousands of years. And no, we have some pretty old olive presses that we can find, and we can point them to you, and we could actually show you. We could give you a tour if you really want. The Jews still need a home. You know, again, the point of Zionism is that it is a movement of self-determination. That's a self-determination of a people. Again, a very liberal argument. You know, Jews have a right of self-determination. There is no place that makes more sense than the traditional Jewish home. And it should apply to Jews more than any other group because we're the ones that have been traditionally the most discriminated against. So the emotional point is really tremendously, it's hugely important. Okay, next slide. Why don't we cry anymore over the Churban Beit HaMikdash? If you look at 19th century travelogues of Christians going to Israel, and there's plenty of them under Google Books, you know, and I do this sometimes, you just look up the word Palestine in Google Books and choose the dates between, 1800 and 1900, and most of them are going to be Christian travelogues that come up. They'll mention every Friday the Jews, or Hebrews, or whatever they want to call them, are going to the wailing place, as they called it at the time, and they're still crying for hours at a time over the destruction of their temple. And this is what our own great-grandparents were doing. And we don't cry over it anymore. You know, Tisha B'Av, how many of us really cry? I mean, it's, literally, I'm talking tears. How many of us really do it? We don't do it anymore. The Kever Rachel and Hebron and Yerushalayim itself are primarily emotional issues. We're not going to, if we get into the minutiae of legalism and we start talking about 242 and we start talking, again, I do this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, and I'm not saying it doesn't have a place. But if we start talking about, okay, what does the Geneva Convention really say about that? We're completely losing, first of all, we're completely losing the audience. But secondly, the fact is, it's an emotional issue. I mean, I have, I visited this time I'm in Israel, I have two grandparents, from different sides that are buried on Har HaZeisim, and one great-great-grandfather, which I didn't even know until relatively recently, is buried there. And so I was able to visit his kever. Now, let's say peace broke out. Let's say, things were divided according to roughly the armistice lines of 1949. How am I going to be able to visit that? How am I going to be able to visit my grandparents and my great-great-grandfather? We have an example. We pretty much know what it's going to be like. I may have put this in the next slide again. I forgot what I said. It might be the next slide. Yeah, it'll be Kever Yosef. That's going to be the model of how we do things. Once a month, maybe we'll be allowed to visit after midnight in armored buses under tight Israeli security while rocks are being thrown at us, and the site is going to be vandalized between visits. I don't even know if the gravestone's going to make it from one visit to the next. That's the best we can hope for under a peace plan. And it's true, because we see it's happening right now in Shechem. We see that's what's happening right now with Yosef's tomb. And is this acceptable? Okay, people in the room could say, people from the Geneva Initiative can start drawing their lines saying, this part's going to be this part's going to be that. And they don't care about this argument, because nobody's making this argument. We have to make this argument loud and clear. Okay, so even if you yourself don't know the legalisms of being able to argue, and again, I think that's, even though I hold that the legal arguments that for Israel being able to hold on to, to the territories are fairly strong, let's face it, the Jews are making those arguments. You're not going to find very many non-Jewish scholars that are going to be doing that. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later, about the whole sui generis issue. But the fact is, so yeah, we can make that argument, and people are going to say, well, they have that side, okay, the truth's going to be in between, let's divide it anyway, the Jews are more reasonable than the Palestinians, because they're the ones that are going to riot, the Jews aren't going to riot, therefore let's give the people who are going to riot what they want so we don't get killed or have any suicide bombings against us, and then everything will be great. But we completely ceded the emotional argument. We can't have that. This is what we should be saying. You're saying, you're telling me Kever Yosef is what we want? You're telling me this is because this is how the Palestinian Authority, the most, moderate leader of the Palestinians, are allowing us to visit our holy sites today. How's it going to be any better? Somebody describe to me how it's going to be better. Tell me practically, step by step, how it's possible that I'm going to be able to visit my grandparents without being under danger, without doing it in the middle of the night, or without being under huge security presence. I can't see it. Next. One of our secret weapons, I think, is Mizrahi Jews. Roughly half the Jewish population, I think, went a little bit below half with the whole Russian immigration, but roughly half the population of Israel are still Mizrahis. Any way you look at it, they're indigenous. So, people always say, oh, Europeans coming in, blah, blah, blah. Helen Thomas saying, well, go back to Europe. Well, half of us were from the area. They understand the emotional component better than most, because in general, the Edot Mizrach are emotional people. Again, I'm not trying to, pigeonhole anybody, but I think this is a good thing. In fact, it's like, again, this is a personal thing. Now I'm saying Kaddish, so I'm running around trying to find minyanim here and there in Yerushalayim. So very often, the only place I could find is an Edot Mizrach shul. And then, again, I'm not as familiar, but I look at the text, there's a lot more emotion in their text of their Siddurim. It's just built in a lot more. The way they have their Kaddish also, it's just, there's a lot. It's like, wow, because you get used to what you were saying, Ashkenaz, you read this, like, they're really, these guys are hardcore. it's really something. And they also know from firsthand, or at least from second generation experience, how tolerant our Arabs are with Jews. I mean, Muslims, they say, oh, the Jews when they were living under us, we lived together and it was wonderful and this and that. And okay, compared to the pogroms in Russia, yeah, it's true. But don't tell me that they were equal. They weren't. It wasn't a tolerant state. And if you read what they're saying right now, the best they can hope for is, again, the Jews being second-class citizens, and we'll take care of them. They pay the jizya tax to us, and everything will be great. So they know, what they're talking about. We need to use them more in their arguments, because everybody that's arguing right now is, generally European. The answers are trying to use the logical arguments. We have to use them more. Next. Of course, we have the security arguments, and these are fairly well known. 9 Mile wide Israel, even when Israel has, they'll say, well, Israel has nukes. Yeah, but what good does that do us when the state is 9 miles wide? We're going to nuke the Palestinians that are going to end up killing half. That doesn't quite make sense. Is it even possible? Should we even consider that a shoulder-mounted rocket should be able to knock down planes that are going to Ben Gurion Airport? And the answer isn't, oh, we'll equip Ben Gurion planes with, anti-rocket defenses. That's not quite the way we need to do that. And we're doing too much of that right now, of course. I'm not going to say anything bad about Iron Dome, God forbid, I'm not going to say anything like that. But too much of our thinking right now is, okay, how best can we hunker down and stop things from happening? How best do we defend ourselves in this? That's not a good strategic argument. So those are all very tactical things, but it can't be a long-term solution. It doesn't work. Ceding the high ground, we all know that as well. They'll be able to shoot mortars. Now, they'll have a better shot at shooting mortars at us than the Gaza does because they have a higher ground. They have more distance. Plus, of course, right now the Arab governments, does anybody think any Arab government is stable enough, let alone the PA, that any peace plan is safe for any period of time? We see what's happening in Egypt right now. It's, everything's in danger. And then the PA is what? And Syria, of course. Well, Syria wasn't a peace anyway, but it's true. But there was the border with Syria was actually the most peaceful border that we had. And this is a huge thing. And people understand this argument because people have been somewhat following the Arab Spring. And who's going to believe that Abbas is going to drop dead? What's happening after him? Nobody's talking about that. The guy is 76, 77. He's not going to last too much longer. He doesn't have a clear successor. I mean, just like Arafat didn't have one, but, okay, it was Abbas. But who's going to be after him? I have no clue. And Hamas is what's going to be after him. And we pretty much all know that. I mean, they did win the last elections. Okay, next. The recent history argument, speaking of, one word, Gaza. Okay, we did give up stuff. What happened? And everybody said, Perez says, how can anybody even think that they would be shooting rockets at us after we gave them everything? What could it be? 2 words, southern Lebanon. And again, think about Burgas, which is Hezbollah has been attacking us a bit more recently than the 2006 war. And of course, they've rearmed themselves far higher than they were in the 2006 war. And the 4 words, Hamas won the election. The last time they had an election, Hamas won, fairly convincingly won. And not only in Gaza, Hamas won practically every city in the West Bank as well, as far as the number of seats in each one that had to do. What's that? All of Israel. All over Israel. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so Hamas won. And so it's like, and who says it's going to be any different nowadays? Okay, polls sometimes say this and that, but I have a feeling that the very religious Muslims aren't always the ones that are answering these polls. So, that the pollsters are managing to get a hold of. Okay, next. Who is moderate? Again, I'm not sure if I put all these slides together in the best order, but let's hope we get everything done. Again, we made this argument before, but Adas is moderate. If you look in the newspapers, Hamas is considered a moderate. But honestly, if you think about it, what's it mean that he's a moderate? He's moderate next to suicide bombers. Netanyahu is hawkish, but he's hawkish next to Haaretz. And this is the way that, but after years and years of the media saying the same words, Abbas is moderate, Netanyahu is hawkish, or Abbas is moderate, Likudnits are, it's ridiculous. But this is over and over and over again, and the media has to be, has to be brought up every single time. It has to be hammered to them, saying, tell me what's hawkish. Using the words without context is, as I say, worse than lying, because it encourages people to think of Israel as being the obstacle to peace. And nobody's trying to do apples to apples on this. Nobody puts the two together. And I've mentioned this also on the blog in the past, but if you compare Netanyahu's stated policies right now to Rabin's policies in 1995, Rabin is the right hawkishness. I mean, there's not even question that Netanyahu is far to the left. He accepts a Palestinian state. He accepts a two-state solution, whether you believe he accepts it or not. He said it, and he has to be held by it, and this is what he said. He's giving, the land into the... Rabin said, no way. Rabin said, I want something less than a state. He said that was like one of his speeches like a month before he was killed. He said, his wife said afterwards, he said there was no way he would have divided Jerusalem. She said there's absolutely no way he would do it. He's a hero. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He's what everybody says is the way is. If only Rabin would be here, then there would be peace. And people don't realize this. This is just, this is not the way it works. Okay, next. Again, going on the offensive, you have to attack the other side. You have to hammer the abysmal human rights records of the Palestinians themselves, as well as Israel's neighbors. This is, you can't just sit there and let them talk about, Israel's human rights. It's absurd. It's something literally it has to be laughed at every single time. Saying okay, fine, Israel's not perfect. Nobody's saying you're perfect. But what sort of a yardstick are you using? You are measuring Israel against perfection, and you're measuring Arabs against 3-year-olds. I mean, really, that is how the media treats the Arabs, is like 3-year-olds. They are not responsible. They don't have the ability of accepting responsibility. They might throw a temper tantrum, and we have to do something to avoid them, or to distract them when they do a temper tantrum. They are the children of the Middle East. The Jews are the adults. We expect them to act like adults. We do not expect the Arabs to act like adults. And this is, again, this is the media. What? That's racism. Of course it's racism. It's exactly racism. And this is the text behind all media coverage of Israel and the Arabs. And you think about it. You can't come up with a counterexample. This is really the way it is. Egypt, okay, so they're raping women in the square. It's really terrible. Yeah, it's bad. What can you do this? It's like, okay, yeah, they'll, really, sorry, you really shouldn't do that. Next year you'll be better. It's insane. I mean, forget Syria, but this is what's happening. It's so completely incomparable. But again, newspapers are comparing, they have their own frame of reference, and it has to be exposed. It has to be blown up, because the frame of reference that Israel is being forced to use is absurd. The absurdity of destroying a state that respects human rights because of human rights. Really, I mean, the one state in the whole region, the only one state that respects human rights, and they're saying, because of human rights, you have to turn into a one-state solution, which is going to end up being majority Arab, and which is going to be like all the other Arab countries, and then the women are going to have to start covering them. I mean, what? It's just like, it's completely insane. These things are having mentioned, and call them on their lies. Abbas and Erekat, every single time they open their mouths, they lie. And I've documented it so many times I can't count. It's just like, it's so many things that it's as easily to live as breathing. And the lies aren't always so clear. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, but they have to be called. This guy's a liar. Listen, you're believing him again. You're believing him again. You're believing it. Abbas said in the UN, only, 16 months ago, and no newspapers picked up on this. He said it in Arabic in the UN, that Israel is raising wild hogs to attack Palestinian farmers. He said that, and dogs too. He said wild dogs and hogs in order to attack Palestinian farmers. And no reporter said, well, this was a little nutty. I mean, I was tweeting with the editor of Mayan, and a little bit about that. And he said, yeah, I think this is what he said. And, he admitted it or something, but nobody translated. Nobody said it. It was just, okay, yeah, boss, what do you want? He's an Arab. He can say stuff like that. But that's really what it comes down to. And this is just, this is the stuff that we have to draw a line in the sand. And we have to hold every newspaper accountable when something like that happens and saying, tell me why you're letting this go. Next. Again, where are the peace groups on the other side? There are dozens and dozens of peace groups in Israel. People that reach out, people that say, okay, let's put together, soccer matches. Let's do, we'll have schools that are integrated. We're going to have meetings with the other side. We'll have our terrorist victims talk with their victims of people. Do we ever see anything like that on the other side? Once? I mean, literally, once have we ever seen a peace initiative, grassroots peace initiative done purely by Arabs? Never.
The KGB style, yes.
Which one?
The KGB styles, they call it peaceful Arab.
Oh, right, yeah.
But as soon as you say something against them, they throw you off.
Right, exactly, right, okay. So it's, for propaganda purposes maybe. Where are those that condemn the anti-Semitic or anti-Christian statements? That occasionally you'll see a tiny bit in the perimeters in the newspapers, and usually they get shouted down. But you don't see the people, because the outrageous statements happen all the time in the Arab world, and there's very little backlash. And again, there's a huge difference. In Israel, one person says anything that's, that could be slightly construed as racist, and everybody's up in arms. They say, how can you possibly do this sort of thing? And they yell at them. And, but it doesn't happen on the other side. This has to be hammered on. Who's working on coexistence between the two peoples? When you think about the settlers, want to work with the Arabs. They want to be able to have it. The settlers that have been there since before the first Intifada, they talk lovingly about, oh yeah, we used to go to Ramallah, I had a bakery over there, I used to have my car fixed by this guy, he used to come over to us, we used to have, we'd go to their weddings, whatever, things, there was coexistence. So the leftists say they say they want coexistence, but they don't. Of course they don't. Yes?
They have outsourced those things.
What do you mean by that?
They don't have the groups, but they have outsourced it to our people.
Outsourcing the coexistence or it's just.
What about providing them employment there, like SodaStream?
Of course,
SodaStream.
Of course, yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, so even that you can argue, okay, maybe so, but the Jews are still in a position of power. But it's not it, because if you look at it, the Jews generally will go as much as possible to try to give them the best working groups. Maybe not 100% of the time. I'm not going to say I've seen. I don't know if I have enough to argue that they said okay, some of the farms in the Jordan Valley might not be. I don't know if it's true, but in general, the Jews do try to share because they want it, because it's just normal business sense. It's what you have to do. Okay.
Positive sum versus zero sum, essentially.
Of course. Oh, but I made that, okay, I'm not sure if I have a slide like that, but that's a huge theme of mine, is that Jews always look for win-win situations to try to come up with a win-win solution. And the Palestinian mentality, I'm pretty sure I have a slide on that, but Palestinian mentality is that zero-sum game. If Israel wins anything or gains anything, then it must be bad for us. And this is, I don't know if it's an Arab mentality, I don't know how cultural, that I can't really answer, but it's consistent.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Honor shame culture.
Yeah, the honor shame culture, well, I'm not sure if I have to think about it. I'm not sure if honor shame is the same as zero sum.
I think it's just the way it manifests itself.
Yeah, honor shame, I'm going to talk about that at a little bit at length later. So, okay. Next. Okay, look at this. I say it here. Zero sum versus win-win. So as I said, Israel consistently tries to come up with the win-win formulas, and the Arabs have consistently acted and said that if Israel wins, they lose. I once found a fantastic, I found it actually a number of times. I would find op-eds in the Arab newspapers that say this explicitly. Logically, if Israel wins, then we lose. And they'll write this in an op-ed. They won't explain, well, can you explain that exactly why that is? Because, Israel's trying really hard to, and Israel, come on, this is what the Zionists have been doing since the 1920s. They said, we're going to build the economy, we're going to make it better for everybody, the Arabs are going to end up being more, and it did work. More Arabs ended up coming in because this is where they can get more salary, and this is all well documented, but it didn't translate into goodwill. And people still have that theory saying, well, if we just act like this, then it's going to translate into goodwill and they're going to like us or they're going to love us. Which is another argument I'll talk about later, the if-then fallacy. We think if we do this, then they're going to naturally do this. And it's not true. The same sort of thing, if you think about it as a zero-sum game, it makes compromise nearly impossible. Because you have to play games to make the other side feel they've won. Or else you're not going to go move any forward. So you have to play some sort of a game to say, okay, you guys can say you won. And then if they say they won, they have no incentive to compromise in the future. Because they say they won, they feel more powerful now. And if we won without winning, then for sure in the future we're going to give up. We're going to try even less hard to, a lot of it, what it comes down to is people have to be honest with each other. And they have to be honest with themselves. And a lot of this stuff that goes on in the Mideast, whether it's in the media, whether it's from the Arab perspective, like that, is just gobs and gobs of gook that's gone on top of the truth that made this weird sort of a fuzzy entity that we're all accepting as truth. or at least as a part of the argument and stuff like that. And you have to, when it fundamentally comes down to it, if you're not talking the truth, you're not going to get to anywhere. So, okay, I'm not saying Israel didn't do anything bad. We have to talk about that honestly too. If there's anything that Israel might have done that's bad. But the Arabs have to accept it. They can't even accept the fact that a Jewish nation exists. And their argument against it, if you read the Palestine papers, they don't say, oh, historically the Jewish nation doesn't exist. They say, we can't accept that the Jewish nation exists because if we accept the Jewish nation exists, then they have a claim on the West Bank. And we can't believe that they have a claim on the West Bank. So therefore we have to come up with this. So, and they say this explicitly. So nothing to do with truth. Truth doesn't even come into it. They say, this is what we have to say because otherwise we're going to lose something. And we have to hammer this. No, we have to go down to the truth. Okay? It doesn't mean we're not going to compromise with you. But if you're not going to be able to admit the truth, how can we have peace with anybody that's going to be lying to us or lying to yourselves? It's just not going to happen. Okay, next. Use liberal terminology. Yes, we're for human rights for Palestinians in Arab lands. Of course, yeah, we want human rights for Palestinians too. And the way I like to say it is that we're Jews, we have rights. We have, right of self-determination, right to be able to live in safety, right to live in security. Within our land, we have these rights. Everything we could possibly do to give Palestinians rights that are not going to conflict with our rights, we should be giving them. As long as our rights aren't impinged, absolutely. There's no reason why we should be doing anything negative to them. There's no reason they should be humiliated. There's no reason we should be treating them as second-class citizens. And listen, I honestly believe that, and I hope that the government of Israel honestly believes that. Because that is the way we should be. The fact is, yes, we want them to have as many rights as possible, but don't start messing with my rights. But in Arab lands, who's fighting for Palestinian human rights in Arab lands? Who out there of the supposedly pro-Palestinian crowd is saying, Palestinians that live in Arab lands that want to become citizens should really be able to become citizens if they want to. Voluntarily. I'm not saying that they should be forced to become citizens, but the ones that want to should be given that option. Why is this a big deal? Because in the Arab League, the rule is that any Arab can become a citizen of every other Arab country except Palestinians. This is an Arab League rule from the late 50s. They came up with this rule. Except they're explicitly excluded. So, isn't this racism? Isn't this bigotry against Palestinians? Where are the human rights, groups that are talking about this? In Lebanon, over the years, about 50,000 Palestinians, they opened up a loophole in which 50,000 Palestinians were allowed to become citizens. They jumped at it. In Egypt, just last year, the court case was a couple of years ago, but just last year they actually started enforcing it, saying, before we used to say that you were an Egyptian if your fathers were Egyptian. Now we're going to allow mothers, if you're Egyptian, to become Egyptian. And all these Palestinians in Gaza who are from mixed marriages, all of a sudden became Egyptian citizens, or all of a sudden it became possible for them to apply for Egyptian citizenship. Thousands did it. None of them said, no, I'm Palestinian. I love my Palestinian land. I want to keep my separate identity. No, but if they had, maybe some of them did. I don't know. But I didn't hear anybody saying it for themselves. It's always their leaders that say, well, we believe it. But Hamas's Zahar, I'm pretty sure, it was Mahmoud Zahar he took Egyptian citizenship when this happened, saying, well, I want to vote in the next elections in Egypt, so I think it's important for me to be able to do that. But he took Egyptian citizenship.
That's dual loyalty right there.
Of course, yeah, right. That's people will be very upset if we accuse them of dual loyalty, I'm sure. Self-determination, we said this before. Yes, liberal terminology. We support self-determination for the Jewish nation. Yes, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you, why do you use the term Palestinians?
Usually, over here, this is the way I'm talking to other people. I almost always use Palestinian Arabs. Over here as a shortcut, sometimes I say Palestinians. Over here, if you're talking to liberals, you're talking to liberals. You got to use their terminology. Again, I don't want to get distracted from the argument. So I agree 100%. I like saying Palestinian Arabs as opposed to Palestinian Jews. But sometimes, I don't want to be as slave. I have been fairly slavish about it on my blog. But sometimes, in reality, when you're actually doing an argument, it's just going to distract. So it doesn't make sense to really do it. And listen, everybody, the Israeli government has been calling them Palestinians for 30 years. It's a little bit hard. Menachem Begin used to say a Palestinian Arab. He was very makbid on that, but nothing's happened since then. So it's a hard. I like doing it because I like being accurate about it. But yeah, I agree.
I just heard a new term today.
What's this?
Palestinian Israeli.
Because Arab Israelis are. They've been talking about that for a while. That they're calling Arab Israelis are being called Palestinian. Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, that's nutty. Women's and LGBT rights, obviously, for Muslims. They should have those rights too. Nobody's talking. There are some groups here and there. I can't say that those groups don't exist. But, well, LGBT doesn't. But women's rights, at least there are some groups that exist for Muslims. Freedom of expression by Arabs in the territories. I mean, Israel, for whatever reason, for some actually very stupid reason, fell down in the last Reporters Without Borders list of free countries from a perspective because they claimed that Israel was targeting reporters in Gaza. So Israel fell down like 20 places. But Israel was still ahead of, I believe, maybe one Arab nation, maybe the UAE, I don't remember. But the fact is, by Arabs in the territories, it's far worse. And not just Hamas, but on the PA also. Terrible as far as freedom of the press is concerned. You know, Khaled Abu Ta'ameh says it all the time. He describes what's happened with him. They have, that's why I read both the Fatah news and the Hamas news, because the only way of knowing what's going on with Fatah is reading the Hamas news. The only way of knowing what's in the Hamas is reading the Fatah news. It's true. It's just the way it is. They're not going to talk about stuff that they really shouldn't be talking about. And of course, freedom of the press. Okay, go on. Okay, the sui generis thing. There's a tremendous video that I just saw recently. I put it on my blog. I think it came out last summer for Robbie Sable, who's a professor of, I guess, international law. I forgot Hebrew. I don't remember where. Really, really great 10-minute video. Sui generis means things that were completely created from scratch from a legal perspective. And he goes through about 10 different things that didn't exist before 1967. These rules just didn't exist in international law. And now they're accepted to varying degrees, you know, some of them more than others, within international law as being international law. They were clearly made only for Israel. The most obvious one that I mean, there are a few of them that actually came up. If you look at the Rome Statute, the thing that created the International Criminal Court, it talks about, you know, here are the Geneva rules that we say are considered crimes. These are the things we're going to be looking at, this and that. And then they have a specific thing talking about, you know, occupied territories. And it's just like, it's not even in the same realm of the, everything else was like these dire things, genocide and this and that. And all of a sudden, occupation, you know, of occupied territories is considered something, one of the main things we're going to be looking at. Clearly, that was written only for Israel. There's no other possible reason for it. I've been a fan lately of a legal scholar named Eugene Kantarovich. He wrote, he did a couple of really good lectures, and they're on YouTube and also on Torah Cafe, called The Legal Case for Israel. And he has interesting arguments, but in the end, I'm not sure if I agree with everything he says in the end, because his upshot is he thinks that there already is a Palestinian state, even before the UN thing. He says that according to his interpretation of the Montevideo Conventions, there already is a Palestinian state, and therefore everything's just a border dispute. Okay, I'm not sure if I completely agree. Yes?
What's the Fourth Geneva Convention ever been applied against China for Tibet?
Of course, no, but he has the entire list of every occupied territory. I think he's working on a huge monograph on that thing, actually, of saying, you know, okay, where's the law and all these things. No, 100%. It's he's going through all of that stuff. But nevertheless, he goes through every single, you know, internationally important, you know, international legally important document from the beginning to the end. And he said something very interesting. What?
Who are you talking about?
His name's Eugene Kantarovich. He's Northwestern University, I believe. But he's been lecturing. He's been going around the circuit, and it's online. And I've synopsized one of his lectures, and another one at least is on. I know it's on Torah Cafe and on YouTube. So he came up with something, a very interesting idea. He said, I want to find out in law books that were written between Geneva, between 1949 and 1967, what legal scholars felt about land that was gained in a defensive war, if that's legal or not. And he said at the time he found two that were for it, two that were against, and one that was non-committal. So it was very, very vague before 1967. And after 1967, all of a sudden everybody says, well, you can't possibly win war. And of course, nobody's really talking about the opposite. Okay, let's think about it. If you cannot gain land in a defensive war, and you have to give back everything every time, then what disincentive do people have to attack you? If they're just going to keep going until they win. Because there's nobody's going to tell them, oh, you can't destroy the other nation because it's an offensive war. You know, that's not going to happen. So it's like, okay, logically it doesn't make sense. Okay, but okay, international law doesn't always have to be 100% logical. So, okay, but nevertheless, there's obviously an argument against that. So once he mentioned that, I decided to do a quick look on Google to see what people said about occupied territories. Before 1967. So I found that apparently he's a legal scholar. I don't know. Kelson, I believe his name was. I'm sorry, I didn't write all this down. But he said it's blindingly obvious. He didn't say blindingly, but he said it's very obvious that the law of occupation only applies to when there are actually two nations that are in charge of the territory, that you're taking over another high contracting party nation's territory. So it's very obvious that's what it is. And his counterexample was like Germany didn't exist after World War II because as a state of Germany, it really didn't exist. It was going to be built from scratch. The U.S. and the Allies occupied much of Europe. They did not have to file, go under these laws of occupation that Geneva has. He said because it wasn't a nation. There was nothing there. So therefore the rules didn't apply. So I mentioned this to Eugene, and he didn't know about it. And he was like, this is fantastic because it really applies exactly to Israel. It's an argument to be made. But the law itself, over the years, has effectively become, geared towards anti-Israel because, again, so you would think that lawyers should be always objective, but it doesn't always happen. The people that officially keep the Geneva, that officially, supposedly interpret Geneva is the International Committee of the Red Cross. And they say explicitly, we say that the occupation is a violation of Geneva. And listen, it's hard for me. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to say it isn't definitive, even though they claim that they're the people that are there to do it. But they say it. What do they base it on? They're basing it on their feelings when it comes down to it. Because obviously, if you look at the history of Geneva, and obviously that's not what they were talking about. It wasn't close to the situation of people voluntarily moving into this other territory. Okay.
How does the United Nations Security Council relate to
international law? Chapter 7 resolutions are considered international law in general. I think there might be some weird exceptions on this. Chapter 6 resolutions are not. Chapter 7 resolutions are. As far as I know, there have been no Chapter 7 resolutions against Israel that really affect it. There was one Chapter 6 resolution that mentioned the occupied territories. Eugene didn't mention. I've always been meaning to ask him specifically, are you telling me 100% this is Chapter 6? So there's one in 1977. I don't remember what year it was. But in general, that's the rule, is that to be true international law, it has to be Chapter 7. And there were a number of Chapter 7 resolutions against, Iraq or Iran or something like that. Those are few. But I don't believe there have been any against Israel. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so but I'm fairly sure.
Because there's unclarity about it, that's why I asked you.
Because what?
There is some unclarity about it.
A little bit. I've seen people argue that, okay, certain Chapter 6 resolutions might have the force of Chapter 7, and that's something that certainly, I'm not an expert in any of it, but I'm even less of an expert on. Okay, wishful thinking versus reality. It's another important thing to talk about. Lots of Westerners, really want to see peace. It's not that they're anti-Israel. It's that they truly want peace. And who doesn't? They really want peace. There's nothing wrong with it, but eventually that desire to see peace interferes with real ability of being able to see with your eyes. The Arab abuses, the incitement, the hate, the anti-Semitism are downplayed because they think if they ignore it, it's going to somehow go away. We don't need to mention it. There's no reason. It's just going to stir things up. It's going to get them upset, but it's on the contrary. The contrary is exposing them, shames them, and shame is the most effective tool that the West has. I think I moved the slide to the very end, so I'm going to go into that a little bit later. But I'm going to go into that in some detail later. But this is the honor-shame stuff. But I think that is the most important thing for us to keep in mind out of everything from tonight. We'll get to that. But again, peace is great, but détente isn't too bad. When the choice is war or the two sides hating each other but not fighting, we don't need love. Too many people think, peace has to be love and flowers and hearts, but the absence of war is a fairly decent definition of peace. And, it's been almost 90 days now since the last rocket from Gaza. I'll take it. This isn't so bad. I don't care if Hamas wants to say that Jews are evil in their literature, as long as they're not shooting rockets, balance, I'll take the no rockets and you say whatever you want. It isn't so terrible. Next.
I just may say something?
Yes, sure.
There's also a big confusion in the Western world regarding sulha versus hudna.
Oh, right, okay.
Peace means peace. There's only one word.
Right, yeah.
Very true.
That's true. The hudna and everything.
It's never said anything about sulha, which is the actual
word for peace, right?
We actually become good neighbors.
That's 100%. That's very true. The true peace is something you don't hear too many Arabs talk about. Okay. Well, I mentioned this earlier, the if-then fallacy. And I have no idea how much time it'll take. Okay, cool. Plenty of time. We've seen many times that people say, if Israel would just do this for peace, then things will be good. Then Y is going to happen. And, for example, if Israel withdraws to the 67 lines, there'll be peace. Palestinians would get no support. I found this fantastic quote in Time magazine in 1988. What happened was, this is when, the one thing that actually was at least an official change in the Palestinian position, there's only one that ever really happened between 1964 and now. There was only one real official change, which was in 1988. Arafat said, you know what, we're only going to be going for the territories to begin with. we're no longer claiming all of Israel. So he implied a two-state solution at the time. So Time was very happy about this, and they said, here's what has to happen. If Israel puts forth a detailed plan for peace, and the Palestinians reject an offer reasonable people can identify as forthcoming and courageous, as they've rejected every attempt. Yeah, we know they've rejected all the time before, for almost a century. Then no one can fault Israel for saying, Shalom, come talk to us when you've grown up. He said this in 1988. He said, if Israel just puts together one good peace offer and it gets rejected, then the whole world is going to say, listen, we're on your side. We know did this happen? It happened. We did exactly this. We did this in Oslo. We did this in 2000. We did this in 2008.
In 1988.
In 1988, right? He said this in 1980. He said, if this would happen, then for sure the world will be on your side. All Israel has to do is do X. Do this, and everybody will be happy. But it doesn't work that way. They say, if, then, and people say, well, maybe, but the then has never happened. It's never worked. And it didn't work in Gaza. It didn't work in Lebanon. We gave out Gaza. We came out of Lebanon. Okay, everything should be great. Israel was very particular in Lebanon, saying, talking to the UN, tell us where the blue line is. Tell us exactly where it is. We're going to go behind the blue line. No claims whatsoever. There's still claims. Hezbollah says no. We have the Sheba Farms. We have a few other places. And the claims are going to keep going on forever. And now people are now taking the Hezbollah claim seriously again. What happened? If Israel does this, then everybody would be happy. 6 years later, they weren't happy. 6 years is nothing. It's less than an eye blink in Middle Eastern history. The Arabs think in terms of centuries, in terms of millennia. They're thinking, they look at Israel. Israel's 60 years old. They think, we kicked the Crusaders out after 100, 150 years, whatever. Yeah, Israel's not going to last that long. They have the long game in mind. Israel doesn't think that way. Israel's thinking and the West thinks also in terms of election cycles, in terms of years, whatever, 4 years at most. You don't think in terms of strategy. But the Arabs are thinking, we got a long time. If we manage to grab a couple inches every year, yeah, there'll be no Israel eventually. And this is why we need strategy on our side. We can't just say, oh, okay, we'll give another shot of giving the Arabs something, and because we'll hope that this time they're going to actually accept peace. Again, we need strategy on our side. And I'm not saying I'm the best strategist by any means, but this is a battle that's going to last for generations. The other side has already created a strategy. Actually, the strategy was created at least in 1968, as far as how to deal with Israel, how to demonize Israel, how to delegitimize Israel. I have a document, a Palestinian document or Arab document then, that I believe almost certainly was written by the Soviets for them. And but it's a tremendous, it's the blueprint. It's practically unchanged on how to delegitimize Israel, and it's exactly what's happening right now. And of course, a lot of the people that are in the forefront of delegitimizing Israel now are socialists. So they're essentially the people that have descended from those that wrote it. They have a strategy, and then the Arabs again also have a strategy. Like I'm saying, the Arabs are saying we got a lot of time. Give us whatever we want. If you don't give it to us this year, we'll get it next year, whatever it's going to be. So when people hear Hamas say, oh, we're going to accept a state, within the territories, and they, for some reason, and Ethan Bronner did this, other people did this, they some reason translated that as, oh, Hamas is accepting a two-state solution. And Hamas doesn't say anything close to that. They're saying, we'll take this. Next year, we'll take that. That's it. Yeah, exactly. So what's our strategy? So, and then again, think about it. If we give away land for whatever reason, a good peace agreement, it doesn't matter, how do we ever get it back? Let's say the other side, Egypt, perfect example. Right now, Egypt is, saying, oh, Israel has, taken nearly $500 billion of stuff they took from us in the Sinai, and we, and all of the stuff in Camp David is like all of a sudden up in the air again. How easily can Israel just say, what, hey, if you don't want to have the agreement, we're taking the Sinai again. It's easy for us to say, it's a very nice rhetorical point for us to say, but we can't do it. It's just something that's not realistic for us to do. So I'm not saying that, listen, peace, 30 years of peace, was it worth it? I'm not going to be able to, I can't say that. I don't have quite that long term of reference to be able to say, we need a few centuries to be able to say whether this 30 years of peace is worth it if Egypt turns into a completely antagonistic state again. It's we don't know at this point, but it's a one-way deal. For what Israel has to give up for peace is always very concrete. What the other side has to do for peace is always a piece of paper. Next. Symposia. Why aren't there any scholarly symposia? And I'm talking here, Yeshiva University, Tel Aviv, I don't care, on Arab anti-Semitism. Maybe it exists, I haven't seen it. But we'll have symposia on, some arcane thing on Jewish history. We'll talk about other stuff like that. But they'll have symposia on, why Israel's evil and why Israel's wrong and this and that. I don't see any of this. And when there are these things that exist and the papers that it generates and the books that they generate and stuff like that, all of those have a snowball effect that there's coverage. And we need that sort of coverage. We're losing the focus that we're always playing defense. There's stuff we have to go on the offense about. Palestinian Arab rejectionism of peace offers. Somebody could write, or come up with a good weekend of information talking about, let's go through it, scholarly way, everything that's happened ever since the Peel Commission report, for example. Yes?
Okay, well, the point of discussing Israeli versus Arab countries' human rights, let's say, it was raised today again at the Model UN that my school participated in one of the sessions. And the speaker was from the PA, and they said to him, you talk about human rights in Israel. What about human rights in Arab countries? He said, I don't care about human rights in Arab countries. I live here. Okay. So, they live here. Well, again, are they talking, he's a Palestinian or he's an Arab or Israeli? He's an Arab who is from the PA.
An Arab, if he's in the PA, then okay, you have your own PA. You're the people that are responsible for it. We don't govern the PA. You have your own rights. It's up to you. You have autonomy.
They're using our democracy against us.
Of course they are. No, certainly. But that's exactly what they're trying to do. Certainly. Even we can have a thing, the legal merits of the Levy report. Okay, the Levy report comes out whether you agree with settlements, don't agree with the settlements, whatever. I haven't seen a good demolishing of the Levy report from a purely legal perspective. I haven't yet. There was one article that tried, but they were looking from, they're saying, well, UN resolutions, this and that, and this and that. But I never saw anyone do a good, and again, pro or con. Levy report, whether Netanyahu accepts it or not, whether Israel decides to go with it or not, we have a document out here. It was in the news. Let's take advantage of it and let's, get the lawyers from both sides to at least be able to say, what are the legal merits, or maybe it is garbage. I don't know. Yes.
I think the answer to what you're saying is the fact that you're anonymous.
Right.
But the point is, as soon as someone comes out with something that goes against the screaming crowd, he's going to be shouted down and smeared and slandered. His life is over.
It depends with who. I mean, I'm not, obviously Palestinians that are going to say anything for is going to happen. In Israel, you're telling me that people can't give an unapologetically argument towards the Levy report, even within Israel?
That goes to what you're saying in terms of the defensive approach we're taking. You agree?
Yes.
I was thinking earlier to what you said about what should be done. Now, thinking back in history, I think also part of the problem is we're 25 people sitting in a room.
Yeah.
And you're one of the keys, you're a key blogger in this.
Okay.
Now, when you look back at an example would be Henry Ford used one of his printing presses to output the book, The Elder of Ziyon.
Right.
And what happened was, I think MGM or one of the more Jewish-owned companies said, as you keep doing that, in every film we make, we're going to make sure that the cars that smash is a Ford.
Yeah, okay.
So I think the solution isn't coming up with this isn't really a question, it's more of a brainstorm. Isn't it a question of just getting someone that's big enough, fat enough, and strong enough to just say, hey, CNN, you do that, we're going to do this. I just think honestreporting.com can't stand up to CNN or BBC. Isn't there someone that can actually be heard from that side and realize, okay, these people are going to cost us financially? This says something. Is there nothing like that happening?
The reason I haven't seen it, and the reason I would be skeptical about something like that happening is that people don't want to trade on their Jewishness. Again, the only people that might do that would be the Jews. You're not going to have, a non-Jew that's going to be doing it. And once a Jewish company or a person that's a Jew that owns that controls a company starts doing that, then he's going to be, people are going to say, well, you're doing it because you're Jewish. I'm not so sure. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it would be great if something like that happened. I think that time might have passed already. That might have worked, 40, 50 years ago. I'm not sure if it could listen, I'm not saying don't try. If you have some, if you can get, Bill Gates to start saying statements like that, I'd be very happy. That would be a wonderful thing. I don't see how to get from here to there. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I would love to know how to do it or what can be done.
Zuckerberg's expressed his support for Israel.
That's true. No, Zuckerberg's good. Yeah.
It's just a question of if we can get him to do more than that.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett invested in Israel.
He did, certainly. But does he say right? Is he going beyond that and saying, hey, if you guys do this, I'm not going to do that? I'm not sure. Yes.
I'd like to make a point on this point.
Sure.
What's interesting is that many news agencies, including the mainstream, have been finding themselves having to pick up items in the internet now. Blog sites like yours, and a lot of the information that's out there, they have to cover the tracks. So there have been many instances that they had to pick up. A good example was Fox News. Remember the Turkish boat incident?
Sure.
Glenn Beck broke it, which really helped Israel.
Yes.
And he placed the film. So then everybody on the mainstream news, people ask, why don't you cover the story? And the story got so hot, they put it on. But a lot of internet sites had the film already, blog sites such as yours again.
Sure.
And then they were forced to do this because people like sitting here, a lot of them have Facebook, Twitter, and everything else, and blog sites that can...
Yeah. I mean, one great thing, and again, this is not from, you're talking slightly different things, because you're talking media coverage and you're talking more corporate type stuff, but one of the best things that happened, and then it could be for a few reasons that this happened, but is that, when Morsi's statements bubbled up saying that the Jews are apes and pigs, and the media ignored it. I mean, Jerusalem Post had it, Memory had it, of course, but the media completely ignored it for a full week before a couple of things happened. One is that Richard Bahar from Forbes wrote a big article saying, isn't this a big story? I'm waiting for the New York Times or somebody else to pick up on this story. The leader of the nation that we're supporting in the Arab Spring has made these anti-Semitic statements. I think this is newsworthy. And he talked to other editors and asked them, wouldn't you say that's newsworthy? And they go, yeah, it sounds like it's newsworthy. So therefore he threw down the gauntlet. And the New York Times the next day had a major story above the fold. Never happened. They've never talked about Palestinian incitement ever. But here, above the fold, they had a thing about the Egyptians. It's possible to shame them. And that's part of certainly what I do, and certainly what all the other bloggers are doing, is saying, Twitter is fantastic because we can directly go to the reporters. We can directly go to they read the Twitter. They read the tweets. And this is a huge, huge thing. Twitter is a potential game changer to be able to get this sort of stuff to happen, because everything else they could sort of ignore, but everybody can see if they've been tweeted to. And okay, it doesn't always work, but it's one of the best tools of the recent years that ever come about to be able to help bring this process along. So yeah, bloggers by themselves, they can sort of ignore, but when we know that it's brought to their attention, they have to at least say, hey, I don't think it's newsworthy. And again, the ombudsman and the different newspapers are also have to answer to these questions too. So things are getting slowly better. I mean, Camera and Honest Reporting do a tremendous job, and a lot of stuff. I spoke with Camera the other day. They spend a lot of time behind the scenes, cultivating relationships with editors and with the people in newspapers. There's stuff we don't hear about, but they really do a lot of stuff in order to be able to get them to say, come on, now you've got to do something. Now you got to step up. And it's a hard job, because it's every single tiny article is a whole new battle, and it's a huge battle each time to be able to bring it up. But it's it's a big thing.
Just to
Yes.
conclude,
Yes.
As an example, and this is for anyone who happens to know Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
The idea would be, for example, if he would say, listen, if you don't put this in the news when it's newsworthy, we're simply going to take CNN off of Facebook.
Oh no, yeah, it would be no.
And I'm just saying, but
it would be great. No, it would be.
Then he wouldn't have all his precious money.
No, I believe me, this will only. There's no the expression that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Any publicity is good publicity. Such a statement would immediately change the way things are happening. I mean.
You're right. No,
I'm just saying this is standard procedure in corporate warfare. This is nothing.
No, you're right. No, you're right. 100%.
The game should be extended.
We need to. Yeah, you're right. I don't know how to reach out to these people. So, but that's a very good point.
We'll have another session on that.
Okay. Okay. Next. We need another Exodus. The Exodus book and movie were probably the best things to ever happen for Israel. We were able to surf on that for decades. A little bit, no, but mostly the older generation when it comes down to it. The kids don't care. They don't know who Paul Newman is.
Cameras.
What's that?
These days we have 5 broken cameras.
Right, exactly. Right, that's what it is. So, but we need something. I mean, but even it doesn't even have to be. The point doesn't have to be Israel. But if it just happens to be an Israeli is a sympathetic character, okay, and it's not and the characters that are not defined by the conflict. The other side tries to define everything that happens in Israel to the conflict. I've talked about what I call occupation glasses. Everything they look at, if anything good happens in Israel, they're saying, well, they're doing it in order to whitewash the occupation. And anything bad that happens in Israel, as well, is because of the occupation. They want everything to be in terms of occupation. And the point is that, okay, this is my last point over here, is that Palestinian Arabs, it's not like, Israeli Jews are saying, we don't like Arabs, we're against Arabs, we're this and that. It's orthogonal. It's like, let them do whatever they want, as long as they don't bother us. This is our land. This is our thing. It's not like we're trying to put you down. You mess with us, we're going to mess back. But, your national aspirations to us are like Tibetan national aspirations. It's very nice. Or Kurdish national aspirations. Okay, do what you can. Have fun. If you go against us, we're going to fight back. If you do, if you want to create an Olympic team, I don't really care. But it's an orthogonal issue. It's not like we don't define ourselves in terms of them, but they think, the Palestinians think, and the anti-Israel groups all think that, everything Israel does is against Palestinians. And it's the exact opposite. It's not against, but it's not for. It's who cares? That we have our land, we're here, we're doing what we can. Now, we're not getting this message across so well. But the fact is, yeah, you're there, so what? If people think, when all of the American coverage of the elections in Israel, they think everything is about settlements. And they do, they're pro-settlement, they're anti-settlement, they're this, they're that. And they were like, it wasn't even talked about from what I can tell in the Israeli elections. It wasn't even an issue over there. It was like, listen, you guys are going to act like that. We're not going to get rid of any settlements right now. If it's okay, illegal outposts, well, but there's a fairly large consensus in Israel that we're not going back to 1967 lines, from practically the left to the right. And that stuff doesn't get out to the media. The American media just doesn't get that at all. Huge gap between Israeli liberals and Western liberals, and they don't get, and that's just something else that they just don't get. Okay, next. Let's pretend, somebody makes an iPad app. Okay, great war app. There's always war apps out there. But in this app, every time you kill somebody, you have to really be careful who you're killing. They have to be in the actual action of shooting at you, or they have to be next to no civilians within the next, however many radius it is. And the evil, and there's always going to be lawyers around that are trying to, it would be a fun thing to do. It'd be right to make a point, but it's like, and especially for kids who think in terms of frag everybody, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, how do I win this game? How do I win this war? It would be a fun thing to do. The reason I say iPad app is because they're probably a lot easier to write than today's PCS, which are like, huge Hollywood productions. But, something like that would be, why not? Maybe a video game like that, it would be a cool thing to do. See, I have this conceit that I can do everything. I can't do this. So if I need somebody else. Okay, next. This is something that, again, all bloggers have this problem, and I'm as bad as everybody else. We need our own online blog magazine. We need our own 972, is what it comes down to. It's a very professional site, and they got a lot of good writers. They put them together, and they have them in one place, and it's nice to read, and it's very attractive and stuff like that. We can't do it because every one of us wants to be the leader of, every blogger wants to be the one that's going to be the lead such a site. So it's
we also have a lot. I mean, there's a lot of funding there.
Of course there is, but I think, it certainly needs an editor or two. It needs, good graphics designers. It needs sort of that, what I think, again, in my mind, and there may be somebody out there, because I try to do things as minimally as possible, I think if just to be able to create a framework and choosing a specific number of bloggers that using an RSS feed and using keywords. If the blogger says this is something that should be in the magazine, because obviously not everything I write I would want to have into the glossy magazine, but if they just say this is an important one, I'm putting it as important, I'm putting a keyword, and then have that automatically RSS and then be able to create, I think it should be possible to do with a minimum amount, with a minimum amount of editing. I don't know, but I would love to have somebody be able to say, oh sure, I could do this. I think technically it shouldn't be a hard thing to do. Next. We need to hold groups to their own standards. This is a biggie. NGOs demand transparency, but they have none themselves. And HRW is, like, for example, the most obvious thing that comes to mind. HRW says Israel must go to these standards. I don't even know where their standards come from. They have their own standards that they've made up that Israel must live up to. But they don't have transparency. We don't know who writes their reports specifically. We don't know what their agenda is. We don't know where they're funding. We have some idea of where they're funding.
We know what their agenda is.
Well, we know their agenda, but it's hard to say. You can't say, oh, you have an anti-Israel. But it's like they don't have any of that transparency. They don't have a methodology, a published methodology saying, here's what we are going to judge other groups against, and it's going to be a standard thing. They don't do that. So if there's no reason why they can't, they just came out with their 7th report on Pillar of Defense. 7! It's like, or 7th publication, or whatever, however you want to define it. And it's just like, what? And that was a relatively minor thing, it was like, and this is 7 of them? And I think like 50,000 people died in Syria since that happened. What's going on here? They don't have their own. Newspapers have published standards, but they also ignore them when they come to Israel. And reporters also report. There's also published standards that reporters have to do. We're not going to say, oh, you're anti-Israel. That's not the winning argument. The winning argument is you are violating your own standards. You're violating your newspaper standards. You're violating your own journalism standards. That's what gets their attention. And it does get their attention. Again, this is the sort of thing anonymous reporting and camera do all the time. They'll say, hey, here's your published standards. Tell me where that is. Guardian has published standards. And they all have published standards. They have to.
Yes, but they do nothing with it, even if you prove them wrong.
That there is something, no, but the British, they will, there's a British thing. It's hard to do. It's very, very hard. It's very time consuming. But occasionally you win a victory because you can prove, and it has to be 100% proof, but you can prove you really violated your own standards. Over a long time, again, it's hard to say. There's the other side is also arguing and stuff like that, but it's still an important thing to do. Too many liberals ignore their own standards when it comes to Israel. We all know this, the double standard over there. We don't really have to talk about them. And saying one of them is anti-Israel doesn't embarrass them anymore. They're just going to say, you're accusing me of anti-Semitism. We're sick of that accusation. We don't care. It doesn't hold any meaning anymore. Begin used to say, this person is not a friend of Israel, and he would think that actually made a big effect on them. It's not that, it doesn't work. But hypocrisy, they can get behind. If you prove to them, hey, this is your own standards you're violating. Forget Israel. You're violating your own standards. They have to answer that to some extent. Okay, next. Okay, I decided to make this at the end because I think this is really, really the most important point. We talked briefly about the Arab honor-shame mentality before. Shame works. This is the biggest weapon we have, is shaming the Arabs. If you think about it, and if you look at the Arab media, let's say, what the Arab media looked like in the 1990s, and again, I can't say from firsthand, but I've seen enough to be fairly certain that what I'm saying is true. Arab media in the 1990s, Arab media today. In the 1990s, explicit anti-Semitism, explicit hate, there was no embarrassment whatsoever as far as what they would say. Explicit lies they wouldn't say. Now, it's somewhat different. Okay, I'm still finding anti-Semitism. I'm still publishing it on my blog, but the fact is, and worse, it's getting worse in Egypt. It's really bad in Iraq for some reason. But the fact is, they will generally bend over backwards to say Zionists instead of Jews. They'll generally try to adhere to some form of Western journalistic standards. And the reason is because now we're in a networked world, and the people that are in their audience can compare to the rest of the world media. There is some pressure. And it's not just that. It's Hollywood. It's, Western value system is infiltrating the Arab society to some extent. And it's something they rail against. Certainly the Muslims are railing against this sort of thing happening. And sometimes for a good reason. They're railing against
English, not when they speak Arabic.
No, that's not 100% true. Even in Arabic, it's not, again, I read the Arabic stuff. It's better. I'm sorry, it's okay. English is much better than it is in Arabic. But there's still some of it. Because again, they're still competing in the workplace. There's Al Arabiya that they have to fight against. They have Al Jazeera they have to fight against. And Al Jazeera has to have a certain set of standards in order to be able to go against CNN. So it's slowly happening. I'm not saying it's a huge thing, but it is slowly happening.
There's tremendous infighting right now in Al Jazeera. A number of major journalists have just resigned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, because of the Qatar being the central focus of all the political interests, but it's starting to
right. But it happens, right?
Which was a very huge force, still is, but already now we're seeing that the fighting that's going on internally is starting to rip that.
Right. It's 100%, but in the end, it still is. It is a marketplace of ideas, and but I do see Western values slowly getting it, and they're very defensive about it. But it's coming down to it. Whether it's women's rights, Saudi Arabia used to say, who cares? When the Olympic Committee goes to them and says you have to have a women's Olympic team, okay, they still manage to get around it, but nevertheless, they're put on the defensive, and the reason they're put on the defensive is because they know they don't want to be embarrassed in front of the Western world. Deep down, they want to be on the same level. They want to be respected on the same level as the West. And they know they need this. I mean, again, I'm not saying this is a huge game changer, but this is a long-term thing as a strategy. I think it's very important because they are shamed. And that's the thing. Al Jazeera, after 9/11 was, silhouette of Bin Laden, they were clearly for it. That changed. And the reason it changed, I believe, over time, is that, again, Western media and Western culture and this and that go into them, and they were embarrassed of being pro-terror. They had no problem, only 12 years ago, no problem being explicitly pro-terror. And now, they're clearly not, at least not explicitly, most of the Arab media is. Okay, obviously Hamas media, and obviously, there's going to be something, but in general, it's not going to happen. They're embarrassed. Or they'll make a differentiation between terror against Israel and terror against the rest of the world. But even that is a victory, a little bit of a victory. It's happening. They can be shamed. The problem is the Western media isn't shaming them. The Western media is doing the exact opposite. When they do something shameful, the Western media is giving them a hands-off policy. Okay, we'll let you do whatever. This is what has to be changed. We need to convince them. We have to expose it over and over and over again. Because when you expose it, it shames them. When it shames them, their behavior will change. Again, it's happened slowly. This is, again, a 100-year thing that we're talking about over here. 200 years thing. We're not talking something that's going to happen next week. But shame works. And it's the only thing that's going to work in an honor-shame culture. They fear shame more than anything else. They fear it more than death. They fear more than anything. They do not want to be shamed. If there was...
I'm more afraid of dogs.
What's that?
I'm more afraid of dogs.
For dogs, okay. I mean, there was, for example, it's a silly example was that there was I don't know, some wire service article about Mali that said, oh, by the way, Mali, they still have they still deal with this black African slave trade. And in Twitter, this person from Pakistan, an imam from Pakistan, wrote back, said, what's wrong with the black slave trade? Muhammad owned black slaves. I think it's perfectly okay. And then, of course, all these people retweeted it and made fun of the guy. And I don't know if he recanted, but the point is, that's the sort of thing most Arabs are going to look at that and they're going to go, I don't think you should be saying that. You know, they get a little squeamish about it. You know, maybe they believe it deep down. Shame works. And it is our only, not our only, it is our most important weapon is what we have. And for Western civilization, I mean, I'm trying not to be hyperbolic over here, but for Western civilization, in order for us to win the value of social values and in order to be able to move things in the direction of progressiveness, we have to shame the people that are not progressive, the people that are acting backward. They will be shamed. They don't want to be known as defending something that we all look at abhorrently. That, you know, they don't, because they want to be part of the world. They want to be looked at as the moral values. They try to take the stance of we are the moral ones over here. And if they keep losing those battles, they can't feel that way. So I really, really believe this is something we have to completely hammer out. We have to get our media to not downplay this bad stuff that's happening in the Arab world. We have to have them not treat them like children. If they want, we need them to change. We have to treat them like adults, and we have to hold them responsible for how they act. And this is the media, this is politics, this is everybody. Treat them like adults. Treat them the way you would expect an adult to act. If they don't hold up to that, they get punished however it is, whether it's socially, whether it's ostracized, however it is. This is the thing that has to be done in order to change the Arab world. This is the only thing that could ever possibly bring peace. Yes?
I'm not so sure. Have you had any dealings with Abu Nima?
I don't deal directly with him, no. Obviously, I read.
Have you seen his book?
Of course I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen what he does.
So one time I called him, instead of the electronic intifada, I called him the electronic infantada.
Okay. Yeah. Electronic intifada. Yeah. Just without he blocks you.
So
Right,
I don't
right.
know if it's going to work or not, because they'll just block you.
But no, but they block you for the direct insult. But if other articles would be saying, no, that's good. But if for example, they Toronto newspaper would say, oh, by the way, we just found out that the electronic intifada has been blocking people who insult them. He's not going to be happy about that. You know what I mean? So in other words, that sort of thing has to be exposed. Okay, fine. Send it to me. I'll mention it. I try not to deal with him because I don't think he's worth it. But it's Twitter. Oh yeah, but that's again, it's a puerile way of doing things, and that's the whole point. They're acting like children. So you have to call them, you're acting like children, and this is what a child would do. If you want to be treated like an adult, and you want to have rights, you want to have responsibility, you want to get something, it's not free. You know, everything it takes, everything has responsibilities that come with it. And that's really what it comes down to. You want rights, fine. Rights come with responsibilities. You got to take it. You can't just say take. I mean, it's 3-year-old mentality, and it's so consistent. And it's like, it's got to be called on. And we need the media. We need to do it. We need our politicians to do it. We need everybody to be able to mention it's the only way they're going to change. So I really, really hold that this is very important. I think that might be my last one. I'm not sure. Yep. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Rights of responsibility, because that was an advertising campaign of Otzma Israel during the last election.
Okay.
And it was banned from
Really?
television in Israel.
Really?
They said it was racist.
What can I say? So it's something else we have to fight against. I mean, you have to write in such a way in which to make sure it's not racist, but everybody has to take responsibility. Yes.
What's your policy about redistributing stuff that is on the blog?
My policy about what? I'm sorry?
Redistributing articles and stuff.
Oh, from my blog? As long as you give a link back to me, do it, have fun. As long as there's a link back, I prefer if it's something like in a major piece of media, at least email me so I know, because it makes me feel nice. But you could copy anything you want as long as there's a link back. Yes.
In one of your
Can I take out
slides,
this thing?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
one of your slides, you mentioned the fact that you always have to go further back into history to prove the Jewish connection to the land. Now, this may resonate good with religious people, may whatever their particular religious affiliation is, could be Christians or whatever, but when coming from a more secular, even atheistic perspective, as I do, I really can't, for the life of me, I can understand the logic behind it, I cannot connect it to it on this level. That's why I want to know what your thoughts are about using the different approach to that. Essentially, I'm talking about saying that, when Israel was, when Zionism began, it was an era of nation building. It was an era of population transfers. It wasn't a unique case.
I hear you. No, you're right. You could say that, and it's an argument. I don't think it's a great argument because you're going to be saying, hey, everybody did bad stuff, we did bad stuff too.
Oh, I don't think it's bad stuff.
But today it's considered bad stuff. It's more creative. There's nothing wrong with adding it as an argument, but I think the fundamental argument still is, and again, and I'm not sure if I agree with you saying, okay, you don't have to be religious to believe in that argument because, Aboriginals, original people.
Interlocutors,
interlocutors, yes.
Yeah, the people you're talking to usually come from the left, and they happen to be liberals, and they happen to be either very secular or even atheists. So that doesn't resonate at all with them.
It's not a religious argument.
That Israel is the religious.
It's not a religious. It's a cultural argument, right? It's a historical and cultural argument. These same people are going to be saying, we shouldn't be hurting Indians on reservations. They have rights to their ancestral lands. They're saying Palestinians' rights to their ancestral lands. They're saying Australian original peoples and Canadian original peoples. There are plenty of people arguing that. Why can't we be the original peoples of our land? We are. We have, so it's nothing to do with religion. It's like we are the Aboriginal people, and we have a ton of archaeology to prove it. So I don't see that as being. It's not a religious argument. I don't think. I think it's like we are there. We're the originals, and we kept such a tie to the land, such an emotional tie to the land for so many thousands of years. We never gave it up. It's not like, we say, oh, we got away, okay, no big deal, we moved somewhere else, everything was great. We always kept ourselves as a people, but we were always centered on the land. No matter where we were, the land was still the focus of our thoughts, the focus of our prayers, the focus of everything that we were doing, of our artwork, of our culture, of our poetry. Everything was always still remaining. It was focused on that. It's not a religious argument necessarily. It's
the religious argument comes a lot when people say God gave it to us.
Right, exactly, right. That's us.
I feel embarrassed.
I'm not saying God gave it to us.
I feel embarrassed when I see it.
Right.
Because it's a conversation stopper, when someone
I don't think so. No, I think what she's saying is right. God gave it to us as a conversation stopper. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying God gave it to us. I know. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that argument. That's not an argument to give people. You don't say God gave it to us. Right. There's nothing to argue. There's nothing. It doesn't buy you anything to say that argument. You can believe it, fine, but it's not an argument. Yes.
I understand his point because in a lot of cases, a lot of the atheists, they don't understand the Torah or the Bible, or they don't read it. The Christians get it.
Oh, sure.
The Christians get it. Of course, that's all in the conversation. I think that the best way to approach them is by using the modern history. A lot of them think that we displaced the Palestinians, when in fact, obviously, we know it was the Arab nations. So you bring that point up.
Oh, that's a huge point. Generally what I say, and again, I want to try to be as honest as I can say, generally the way I describe it, and I believe this 100%, is that there was a small percentage that, the Arabs said, get out of the way while we kill the Jews. There was a reasonably small percentage, again, I don't know, 5%, 2%, 1%, that Israel actually did, kick out. It's true. There was the vast majority of people in 1948 left out of fear. A war was coming. Look what happens in Syria right now. There was a war. There's things happening. They want to get the hell out. They don't want to be in the crossfire when this third thing happens. It was very reasonable that Palestinians felt that way. And I went over this in my YU talk, but very briefly, you have to understand a little bit more history. In between 36 and 39, when they had their first, you could call it intifada, whatever, but they had the first uprising that the Palestinians had against the British and the Jews, and more Palestinians ended up dying by far. But a lot of people, especially the rich, and especially the influential, the leaders, the Palestinians, a lot of them just packed up and said, we're going to Lebanon until this thing blows over. Fine, they went to Lebanon until the thing blew over, and they came back. When things started happening in 1947, they said the exact same thing. To them, all of Arabia, the whole idea of dividing the Arab world into nations is still only from 1917. It was only a 30-year-old thing. It's something they certainly didn't internalize. So they were saying, okay, we move to another part of the Arab world. They'll accept us. If we have to stay there, we'll stay there. If we have to come back, whatever's going to be. And they didn't anticipate that the Arab world was going to be the ones that started discriminating against them. That's really what the problem was. They were like, okay, we'll move somewhere else. This is what we've done for generations. We are nomad. I'm not saying everybody's nomad and everybody's a bad one, but we move from one place to another as the economy makes it better. Okay. So, but it was fear is really the important thing, and it's not unreasonable. Yes.
What worries me is that none of these moral or historical or logical arguments have any influence at all on friends who are influenced when they hear soldiers from Breaking the Silence, or Mahsom Watch, or Haaretz talking about terrible things that we do, and some of them are true.
Yeah.
And I think it's terribly important to know how to deal with those, more so than these theoretical arguments.
To me, and again, it's easy for me to say this from not living here, so maybe I'm wrong. But for me, the answer is investigate it very seriously, and if people are guilty of this sort of thing, punish the hell out of them. It has to be done. We have to take it seriously. We can't just, if it looks like it's being whitewashed.
Our authorities don't deal with
No, they protect them.
I know. So that's something, okay. So that's something that has to be done within Israeli electorate in order to be able to fix that sort of thing. From my perspective, that's the only way to do it. We have to be consistent. If we're going to claim to be moral, we have to be moral with our own problems. And there's no...
These are the real problems we have to deal with at the moment.
It has to be dealt with. But in the meanwhile, I'm very hesitant to...
Enemies who have been influenced. It's a lot of erstwhile friends.
Right. But also, we could still contextualize it. There's still...
people who fought against apartheid in South Africa. They believe sincerely in their own minds that Israel is I would even say, obscene state. That's how they feel today.
Right.
Particularly with the apartheid appellation that's given. And these are things we've got to concentrate on how to deal with.
No, it's very important to me. Again, and it's hard. I try as much as I can for Achdut, for unity. So it's hard for me to say anything, just from my perspective of a blog, of saying anything that's going to, if I don't know the full story, I'd want to be as much dam chafskut as I can. But the fact is, whether it's bloggers or like you or whatever, to be able to say, so from my perspective, this is completely wrong, 100% wrong. I'm not going to condone it in any way, but look at what's happening. Contextualize it as well. You're right. It shouldn't happen. And Israel's wrong if they don't go after them. But next door, it's a billion times worse. Yeah.
Because we have so many useful bloggers around here today, that we exert some influence on our foreign office. Write letters not only to the press, not only against bad articles, but write to our foreign office and our politicians. Write to the IDF spokesperson and say, why haven't you dealt with this? Or please give us credible information to enable us to deal with it.
I agree, 100%. We definitely need more information.
That's the appeal I'm making to all the bloggers.
I understand. You made that point. Very good. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much.